Hey everybody, welcome to the Social Media and Politics podcast, bringing you expert insights into how social media is changing the political game. I'm your host, Michael Becerra, Associate Professor of Communication at Lund University. Remember, you can follow the show on X at SMNP Podcast, or visit us on the web at socialmediaandpolitics.org. So, here we are for the 10th annual Social Media and Politics Year in Review with my guest and co-host today, Dr. Anamaria Segesten, Vice Dean of Research at the Joint
Faculties
of Humanities and Theology at Lund University. Dr. Segesten, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. This is the highlight of my December prior to Christmas, or close to Christmas.
Indeed. It is a bit misleading as the 10th annual because the podcast is not yet 10 years old, but it is technically the 10th annual because it started in October 2016. And what a way we've come.
Amazing. I think it's fantastic, not only because the pod exists, but also because we can trace the topics that dominated social media and politics over roughly 10 years. And it's amazing to see what has changed. Maybe we'll resonate about that later on. But I think it's interesting. A lot of things are different now than when our first conversations kicked off.
Definitely. And so for those who this is their first year in review, there is a bit of a recurring theme or format, which is we give gifts to you, the listener, to open up throughout the episode. And over the years, we've tailored it down from 3 gifts to 2 gifts each, as we do tend to go a little bit long in this episode. But this year, as always, we promise to keep it as short as possible, and we'll see what happens.
Indeed. We can at least vouch for interesting content that will basically fuel a lot of interesting thoughts for us and for the listeners.
Yes,
that's the goal.
Because almost every time we do this, it starts off with, what on earth are we going to talk about? But it is a good chance to kind of sit and reflect about the year that's passed and what can we say about social media, its political implications, and always we come up with something, and over the episode continue to build that out.
And it's interesting to see that a lot of times the conclusion of our year and our gifts is not far off from what actually turns out to be the case in the next year. So I think it's of value in that sense to look back and plan forward.
True. And there's been a lot to reflect on this year. And I know that we will hit on things that are top of mind, not only on the media agenda, but also for our listeners who are either studying or working in this space. So without further ado, why don't we hop right into the first gift?
Which is always the platform year in review and the pod year in review, isn't it?
That is right. That is right.
After 10 years, I actually remember.
So traditionally, what we've done is to go through the year in review reports from the various platforms. And over time, these have just become less and less and less. And the idea, well, scratch that. Let's hop into what there is always something to say about, and that is, as you mentioned, the state of the pod in the past year. So over the course of this year, there have been 13 episodes, plus this one for 14.
Good job.
Yes, over the benchmark of 12. I know that the release schedule has been on and off, but so is life. And there's been 12,500 downloads-ish, which is always nice. So what I can kind of focus the state of the pod this year on is something I know you like, which is data from the Spotify listeners.
I know, because I am a Spotify listener myself. This is my platform of choice.
I forgot to do this last year, but Spotify had a nice unwrapped for creators. And yes, you are one of the Spotify listeners. Most of them are German, actually.
Really?
Followed by Americans, which Americans always just kind of top the charts by mass. And I think Dutch were also up there. So kind of a Northern European element here with Spotify. But they don't give you this data. You can't log in and get it, but they presented it as part of the Unwrapped.
For the pod account.
For the pod account, for the subset who listens on Spotify. which is there's something like 175 top fans, whatever that means, and then there's over something like 2,000 that follow the show, but not that many that.
Did you make a little video? Because I got a video from some other pods that I follow, a little jingle saying like, "Thank you for being like a top 1%."
Yeah, I could have hit share and done that, but I don't know, I didn't.
Not this year.
Not this year. So, of this subset of listeners, who are the top artists that they listen to?
Because it gives you this cross data.
Because it's Spotify,
I'm so curious.
Right? Well, number one, perhaps unsurprisingly, is Taylor Swift.
Well,
followed by Bad Bunny, Olivia Dean, Sabrina Carpenter, and Drake.
Who's Olivia Dean? This is my question.
I don't know who three of these people are, but that is the data. We also get data on the other podcast they listen to, and the number one is Kontoret.
A Swedish one.
Yeah, The Office. The second is The Rest is History, which I can report by looking at Apple's year in review. This was their best podcast. They gave an award to one podcast, and it was The Rest is History. Number three is The Rest is Politics.
That's me.
Yeah. Number four, The Ezra Klein Show. And number five, Lund with an H. Lund. Huh. Now, what was cool is they did give some additional stats. So of these fans, which don't know exactly what constitutes a fan, people who listen, fans listen longer to this podcast than 87% of other shows. So people are actually hanging around. So thanks for that. And this was funny. I received more comments than 78% of other podcasts this year. And that was achieved with a grand total of 2 comments. So thank you to Thorvalder and Robert who left comments. And I'm sorry that I didn't see them until I actually checked these stats. I didn't even know you could leave comments on.
You cannot see that? It doesn't give you an alarm?
Nope. So there was one from Thorvalder from 2 years ago. So I wrote him thanks and sorry I didn't see it. So thanks for listening, you guys, and thanks for commenting on Spotify.
Well, interesting. I think it's funny how maybe social media formats are being tested on Spotify, but not necessarily used so much. Like this option exists, but 2 comments give you 78%.
Pretty funny, right?
Which basically means nobody comments.
So keep those comments rolling is one takeaway. But overall, I remember last year I was talking about wrapping down the pod at some point. This year's been more inspirational. I feel good, especially the past sort of second half of the year. Not that the first half was not good, but there's a bit of a wind in the sails to the pod. So I already have 2 episodes recorded that will be out in January. That's on very interesting historical look at the rise of the celebrity politician. It's even if you're not into history, it's fascinating. We have one on a journalist who's using TikTok and sort of going viral to talk about what is the modern news cycle. And then in mid-January, I already have a recording to look at AI, government, and democracy.
Ooh, with, hot stuff.
Some researchers from Harvard. So pod is healthy. Things are good.
Not to forget that you've got an award, haven't you?
Yes.
Tell us all. It has to be commemorated.
Yeah, and I think it was Thorvalder who, that was his comment. Congrats on the award. Yeah, for public engagement, which was a nice recognition. So, things are good with the pod. Enjoying it. I think I will go kind of dark every now and then over the summer just to deplug. But again, it goes back to what we started this episode with, that this is still a space and an evolving space. So happy to facilitate and explore this ever-evolving space.
You know, for the first time ever, Golden Globes will cover podcasts in 2026, which means podcast as a genre is very strong, and it's getting so mainstream that it will be combined into this general entertainment category, which is not necessarily the social media and politics podcasts niche, but the genre of podcasting is now out of its, let's call it infancy, and being consecrated as a traditional, at this point, established medium.
Absolutely, and you see this with the number kind of rises every year, percentage of people who've listened to a podcast in the past week. And the numbers for this podcast are great for an academic podcast. I have no just so the listeners know, there's no sort of drive to grow the thing, because I don't think what we talk about here has mass appeal, and I don't really want to take it in that direction, because I like keeping it focused and rigorous in a way.
There's a difference between having numerous listeners and having good listeners, in the sense that there's a crowd that is literally interested in this topic. And hopefully we will deliver tonight and you deliver throughout the year.
And we don't have good listeners, we have the best listeners,
We
meaning
so
they're
do.
not getting coal for Christmas. So thank you all for your support and continuing on listening longer than apparently 87% of other shows on Spotify. Let's go on to the Year in Review reports.
Year in Review report of the platforms.
Of the platform. So Year in Review 2025. And for those, just as a reminder, or for new listeners tuning in, the idea is to kind of understand the discursive positioning of these platforms. How do they present their years in review? You can usually read something between the lines of what they want people to think of them as. And I think that the overall takeaway from this year is that the key word is silence.
Ooh.
In the sense that these reports have been sort of becoming less and less over the years. They used to be, Facebook would have, here's the top things that were shared, top discussed. There used to be, even on Twitter, the top politicians on
the good
Twitter.
old days.
So this year, almost most of the major platforms have not, and I've checked, believe me, I've checked. So we don't have anything from Meta. We don't have anything from X. Reddit Recap is dead. Check Truth Social, Twitch, Telegram, Red Note, no dice.
Seriously.
But we do have something for Google, YouTube, TikTok, Snap, Pinterest, and everyone's favorite, Pornhub. So let's start with Google and YouTube, because I think they offer a nice summary of what the themes of this year were, both political and non-political. And what seems to dominate more or less, what kind of pops up over and over again, is the new Pope. That happened this year, early in the year, but it did. K-pop as a sort of a cultural phenomenon. What really dominates in especially the Google and YouTube is these cricket matches between India and England. And I looked into this. Apparently it was like, cricket can go over multiple days. There was 5 games, and they all went to the maximum day, just one of the greatest cricket showdowns ever. And they tied, as far as I understand. Charlie Kirk topped the charts repeatedly.
Charlie Kirk, who was killed this year.
Exactly. So that was a really big moment, and probably one of the only ones that was, super political explicitly. And then the LA wildfires. So those fires that tore through
that was early in the year,
the Palisades, which led to a lot of political discussion about management and whatnot. But those are kind of, to prime you, that's kind of what these reports show. So if we go to Google first, they had the Year in Search 2025, where they break down, and again, there's links to all of these in the episode description. So if you want to go into the Google one, you can check out what's going on in your specific country. But you get things like what are the trending searches. Then you have entertainment, sports, lifestyle, and gaming, and a number of other ones. So if we start with the Google Trends worldwide, we have number 1, Gemini, this AI tool.
It's very interesting.
I wonder if Gemini is who exactly?
It's Google.
That's what I'm wondering. Really, is it? Or
this is getting so incestuous.
Or do people just go to Google to search Gemini?
I think if I am to venture a guess, it's not verified, but my guess is that people go to Google and search, how do I get on the Gemini platform to ask Gemini chatbot a question? And I think this is now served more easily with a little icon, a little star icon that you can see on a lot of Google homepages. But prior to that, a lot of people had to search the homepage of this chatbot.
And I wonder if, because you do get that Gemini synthesis in Google, if there's some kind of counting that on the back end to plug it as number 1.
Basically, I don't know if this will still be the case later on, so maybe it's a moment of history that we freeze in time now. But at the moment, when you ask a more complex question rather than a specific question, you would be given a summary. And after that, there is an option, deepen your knowledge with the help of AI. It's a button that you can click on and it leads you to Gemini. And I think a lot of times this search connection between actual search and an explanation given to you or summarization given to you by an AI bot is increasingly the modus operandi of this Google search engine. And they did it this way in order to compete with other chatbots that launch their own search engines trying to rival Google's.
Right. But still, we don't know whether people are actually searching Gemini or this is kind of a little bit of a manipulation to get it up there. Who knows?
They've been in the news because Gemini beat OpenAI in terms of performance recently. I mean, in the second half of the year. And maybe people are curious, people that were ChatGPT aficionados now think, oh, there's a better model out there. What is this Gemini about? And maybe that's justifying this presence.
Could be, but that was the top worldwide trending, followed by India versus England, this cricket match, which I think just speaks to the volume of Indian people who are interested in cricket. Number 3, Charlie Kirk. Number 4, Club World Cup, which was apparently, and I could be wrong because I don't follow football, is that the World Cup, there was a World Cup in soccer this year, but like within the Club World Cup is a bit expanded. I don't know. I tried Googling it, but it probably contributed to
I
these
will
stats.
not provide any additional commentary.
And India versus Australia.
Rugby?
Which I think was also cricket. So again, I think it's a lot of these cricket fans. But then they also have a top news. So this is a little bit more interesting for the political focus crowd. So number 1 was Charlie Kirk assassination. Number 2 was Iran. 3, the U.S. government shutdown. 4, new pope. And then 5, the wildfires.
Okay, Iran.
Yeah, remember there was, they got bombed.
Yeah.
And then top people, we have number 1 is, and this is one of my cultural knowledge blanks. I think it's David, the D4VD. I think he's a rapper, followed by Kendrick Lamar, followed by Jimmy Kimmel, Tyler Robinson, Pope Leo XIV.
This is what I remember. I'm not a frequent late night shows watcher, but I do remember Jimmy Kimmel exclaiming, "I beat the Pope." Now I understand what he meant. Like he's number 3 and Pope is number 5 in this top, right?
And then if we look into the U.S. specifically, we see a little bit more like the One Big Beautiful Bill, Mamdani, tariffs were up there as well. So you kind of have to zoom into your country to see what's...
Did you look for Sweden?
I didn't look for Sweden, but they have every country in the world. So if you want to go and kind of see what's been trending in your region of the world, feel free to do so. So that's Google. Just gives you, I think it's a good summary of like what actually happened. Like again, Pope fires Charlie Kirk.
No Gaza. No Ukraine.
Gaza. No.
These would be some of the major conflicts of this year.
And also, no Trump, which is quite interesting.
They don't need to Google him. The news finds me syndrome is now manifest.
Or just, fatigue. But that's Google. And then if we go to YouTube, they have the year in search. And what they do is they have a video that they always put together, a very nicely produced video that it's hard to actually kind of discern the theme because it's a video. But theirs is basically all the words that start with a re. So like reimagine, rediscover, reinvent, rethink what's possible.
Ooh.
That's how they packaged it. I mean, at some point, it seemed just like quite a lot of fluff. But they showed things in their video. Just point out something I thought were interesting. The Lady Gaga concert in Brazil.
Yes, that was massive.
Labubu's, which also featured at some point in the Google searches as well. K-pop. But there was a very short acknowledgement for Mamdani after winning the mayoral
Amazing
election.
that such a local election gets universal coverage.
Again, it lifted into quite a few of these. So he makes a short appearance, which was one of the only things that I thought was explicitly kind of electoral politics. Yeah. But yeah, so that's kind of the summary. Again, I think it's Pope, Kirk, wildfires, some cultural phenoms like K-pop and Labubu's. Interestingly, not so much Trump.
Interesting we've talked about this every year when we think about what does it mean to search for something, right? And there's a priority for things that you search if you don't know. So Mamdani, this is a strange name nobody has heard before. And so there's a lot of curiosity which is reflected in his searches. What is this thing about? Like, who is this unknown person that now seems to make a difference in the world or in New York, which is an attraction or interest point? So a lot of the known knowns, such as maybe Trump, such as Gaza, such as Ukraine, Putin, Russia, you don't need to search for that because you already have sources of information that give you the knowledge required to navigate these topics. So I think it's interesting to think about these search topics as new things. For example, Isla Bubu, a 2025 phenomenon. Again, no expert here, but because of the search.
I think so.
Yeah, probably it is. Lady Gaga's concert was this year, and that's why it broke a record now. And people are like, how big was this concert, really?
Yeah, so it's interesting. There's kind of this novelty bias of sorts. And then there's also, just thinking about it now, that these AI chatbots are starting to take over search functions. So it used to be Google was you wouldn't look to Bing to see what was trending in the world. But maybe there is something where these, what was number 2 and what was number 4 might be a little more difficult to trust because a lot of that is being diverted into these sort of walled gardens of AI.
There's no OpenAI year in review.
I didn't check. It's too new. Apropos novelty bias.
Or Claude. Apropos this idea that they're expanding into territory that typically wasn't theirs, including search.
It's a good point. I didn't even look to check. So for the 11th annual, we'll
it
dig
would
into
be a
that.
sign of the times, perhaps, to look into the AI world more.
Indeed, if they have something. And there's a good argument that they would, because I do think that the platforms that are newer tend to produce these more than the platforms that are older, which will bring us to TikTok.
They have a review.
They have and it's a little bit of a cop-out, well, take what you will from it, but it is they have the top artists and songs of 2025.
Okay.
That's all they talk about. Previous years, they did have a section about cultural activism. But what's important to read from these reports is that, and they're very explicit about this, they market themselves as the unrivaled home of music culture. And I think from last year, they even had it more strongly, that they're the unrivaled home of cultural trends. Like it starts on TikTok. And there's something to that when it comes to these reports. So this is about artists and songs on the platform. The global artist of the year is Cat's Eye, all in caps. I have no idea who that is. They ranked the top 10 artists, though. And guess who came in at number 10?
Taylor Swift.
Ariana Grande.
Oh, our favorite.
She makes an appearance. There's no year in review where Ariana Grande does not.
I think because of Wicked, of the film. It's a musical that now has been made into 2 films, like Wicked 1 and Wicked 2. And she's been on great world tours promoting these films.
Well, she eked in at number 10, but her star power we've watched it decline over the past decade.
It was Selena Gomez versus Ariana Grande. Oh my God.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, they go into all sorts of different music stuff, and I didn't really feel like reading it all. But it was interesting that in 2025, 8 out of the 10 Billboard #1 hits had a TikTok viral moment first. So you see this kind of interesting blend of, as they say, the unrivaled home of music culture. So that was TikTok.
And what was the song?
Couldn't tell you. But let's move on to something a little more interesting, which was Snap. And we have the Snapchat Recap 2025. And there they actually did give some things that are quite interesting. So what they talked about is that, and we talked about last year on the year in review about this idea that text was becoming more important with things like Substack.
Yeah.
Not on Snapchat. Voice is trending up.
Voice?
So voice calls and voice notes were up 1.7 billion minutes on average in calls.
My God.
So that's up 20% year on year, and there's 5 million voice notes in the US per day, which is up 10%.
That's a lot.
So that was kind of led with that. They had also this interesting kind of, I guess they did a survey of people, and they had this idea of casual cool, which is that I've branded this as pointless has a point, which is 40% of younger people think that if you send random moments from your day, that's a signal of being closer and closer friends. So it seems pointless, but there's a sort of bonding that goes on there. And then chat reactions were up by 44%. I mean, it's something. We're getting some data from the platform.
At least they're still going strong. There was a point in time when I was thinking whether they would survive or not in the competition of platforms, but it seems that they still exist and they still have faithful users and that they are engaging in different ways with the platform. I'm glad for them.
Well, here's a question for you. I remember, I think it was last year, I learned a little bit about cultural trends with these reports. Last year we talked about beige flags versus red flags and green flags. That was from TikTok. But this year, and this is how I learned about this, and I'm sure many of the listeners know, and I'm sure many don't, about the 6'7" meme.
Oh my God, it was all over. This was like a watershed between being old and being young. This was, I think, a theme across Instagram and Facebook and Snapchat and TikTok.
It was big, and it was also featured when there was well, first of all, would you like to explain what the 6'7" meme
No,
is?
I don't want to explain exactly because I've heard several interpretations of this. Everyone now piggybacks on this. So they label these posts. Let me tell you what it really means, but I'm not sure that there is a unified meaning today. I think it started as a real teenager's
its origin
code.
is in a rap song. And then somehow it got amplified by a NBA player, a basketball player, who is 6'7". And
Oh my God.
him doing there's a thing you do with your fingers that like makes a 6'7", and that relates to Snapchat because the 6'7" like Bitmoji sticker was the most used sticker since it launched.
Oh my
So
goodness.
whatever that means, and so I've been trying to figure out what is this 6'7", and I was actually recently at a dinner with a number of younger Swedes, and I was trying to ask them because it came up in conversation. I was like, "Oh, we got this pod. I've heard about this 6'7". What the hell is it?" And they said basically like, "Yeah, no one knows what it is.
It's something cool you shouldn't be in the know for."
Yeah. So,
I think what I've interpreted as people who are like, as I said, the difference between generations. So if you belong to the generation who knows the history and knows the references, then you're young and you're in the know. And if you're maybe over a certain threshold, then you're kind of left out. And this is why there's been like parents versus children dynamic on a lot of these platforms. So I'm not surprised that Snapchat, that still skews a bit younger, would have this sticker as their number one. It's a form of fun signaling.
yeah, and I think that's all it is.
Yeah,
as far as I understand.
Form without content, but signaling cool attitude.
Right. So that did. Maybe I already said it, but like in that YouTube video, there was the year in search. There was that moment where the basketball player did the 6'7". So like it's around. It's a kind of theme throughout these things. So that's Snapchat recap.
No politics.
No
directly.
politics. No, there's no politics in any of this for the most part, which leads very well into Pinterest Predicts, which is
Typically not very political.
typically not, but it's fun because Pinterest, we don't talk about Pinterest very often, but what they do is they use their internal search data to highlight the trends that they think will happen the next year. And then what they say is that we always go back and we see how our predictions fared. So I was thinking, okay, well,
How was it last year?
How was it last year? Last year was cherry coated, Rococo revival. So I went and I looked, and I only found, I really had to dig around, and they did highlight 3 that did come true, they said. And in general, they claim that over the past 6 years, 88% have quote unquote come true, which they don't explain what that means other than that they use internal data, searches, and in particular, product outbound clicks, which sort of is a good measure, right? That people are potentially buying
More
stuff.
hard measure.
So I did look to see what they predicted last year, and they highlighted 3 that came true, quote unquote: the fisherman aesthetic, cherry coated, and pickle fix.
Pickle face.
So how do they operationalize this? So like outbound clicks for pickle seasoning grew 835%.
Oh my
Which
God.
leads them to believe that pickle fix was successful. And searches for cherry martinis grew 130%. And fisherman
sounds
outfits
good, though.
190%. So have you noticed fisherman aesthetic cherry things, and pickles.
I have actually noticed the cocoa trend, because I think it tied in with the Pantone color of the year for 2025, which was Mocha Mousse, which was still like this cocoa family. And I do think that brown was a color that was trending.
Hold your horses, because that is one of the trends for next year
Oh no.
as well.
Oh my God, I'm very much into colors, so I'm very much curious what they predict.
So for this year, again, these are the trends that should be prominent in 2026. They have 21. None of them are political, but I like to kind of pick out a few highlights that I think were interesting. So as we said, last year was Rococo Revival. This year's, I don't know how to say this, Neo-Deco. Neo-Deco.
Neo-Deco. It's like Art Deco revival.
Yeah.
Cool.
I'm trying to get the E's to sound the same.
My favorite time period.
So they see that searches like antique bar cart are up, brass aesthetic. So we can look.
I really hope this comes through.
So we can expect some more strong geometries and chrome and brass edges. Pen pals. This was an interesting one. So people are searching for things like snail mail, how to decorate cards, and kind of, in a sense, getting the idea of handwriting letters.
You know, maybe this ties into, I don't know where I read it, but I did see it in some form of year overview of something, not necessarily social media platform, but some trends that people detected, that knitting and doing things with your hands, watercolor painting, knitting, and there was another thing, maybe journaling or something like writing with pen on paper. These were trending, or they were growing, maybe not trending literally, but growing from baseline of 2024 during 2025. And I think this signals something that I might be touching on a little bit later on, which is this oversaturation with digital and AI modified things. So people have this pendulum effect, right? So perhaps, again, venturing a guess, it's signaling this idea that we want to do things that are physical and that are in the now and that are immediate and connected with our embodied cognition rather than just exposure to digital products.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good read.
And this is an anecdotal evidence, which is very thin, but I do occasionally go out for cafes in Lund, and I do see an overwhelming representation of people knitting of all genders and ages, but in particular young people, which is somewhat unusual in the landscape so far. So maybe there's some truth to this.
Some kind of corrective.
In some demographics.
Yeah. So others were mostly fashion trends and khaki coated, going to this idea of brown. Khaki should be in laced up, so a lot of lace, and vamp romantic. So,
I see that too.
Less fishermen, more vampires and lace is the prediction from Pinterest.
Interesting. One thing I also can comment on Pinterest is that also non-sourced properly, but having browsed not necessarily Pinterest, but Pinterest adjacent visual media, people were commenting on how well Pinterest is recommending stuff. They have a great recommender system, which maybe underlines their claim of being able to predict what the future year would look like, because it seems to be able to really identify not only color schemes or, so to say, harmonious or disharmonious types, but also content within the pictures you would save. And the suggestions from Pinterest to expand your walls, your collections, most people were very impressed and satisfied in terms of discovering new things with the help of the automation they deploy. So they must have a very good AI.
Yeah, always kind of flies under the radar, Pinterest. As well as the next platform, Pornhub. 2025.
I don't think it flies so much under the radar.
Year in review. And interestingly, just by far the most detailed report. I love reading these. I'm not going to go into everything, of course, because it's a little bit...
Less political.
Less political. But it's interesting because they add their top trends that defined, the year. And traditionally, they've argued that pornography reflects other cultural trends.
Exactly.
Like if you see things in some space, it's going to kind of spill over into pornography. So number one for them was diverse desires, which is essentially the idea that LGBTQ+, that's their phrasing, that type of porn is up, particularly lesbian porn, trans porn, and trans being the second most viewed category.
Wow.
And true to form, Pornhub's brand ambassador ties this to cultural trends by saying that this is a cultural shift, breaking old ideas about gender and sexuality. It's amazing to see viewers become more open-minded and interested in authenticity.
That is a very interesting message that emerges from real data, which I suppose this is what is based on, not on intentions, but on actual execution, as opposed to what comes from the political space, where this anti-diversity trend would be more of a signal you'd pick up, right?
Yeah, maybe they're also related, apropos pendulums, right?
Yeah. People are just never heard about this. It's been politicized, and now they search for it and try to see, what is this all about?
So there were other leading trends. Mature, number 2. Role play, 3. Cheating, number 4. Interesting. And
OnlyFans.
Femboy. So yeah, you can go and check it out. There's like tons and tons of data there. They also clocked the highest point in traffic.
This is what I'm looking for every single year.
Which was January 5th at 11 p.m. Why? The Golden Globes ended, a big NFL game ended, and there was a winter storm across the U.S. So good times. So there was nothing really directly on politics, but they did produce special reports for the New York mayoral election.
Oh, really?
Norwegian national election and Canadian election. So I scouted around those, and it was interesting in New York that, like, if you look at the Norwegian elections, it's just kind of like scattered data. There's no real story to tell. But if you look in New York, the drop in Pornhub traffic was huge around 9 and 10 p.m. when the results were coming in. About 40% drop in traffic, and interestingly, equally between men and women.
Mamdani, he's basically the person of the year by this data.
Costing Pornhub some ad revenue. And the Canadian was kind of funny because searches of Canada increased 323% on the day of the election. So that's some kind of marker of patriotism. So that's mostly it for the year in review reports. I'll add 2 very short additions. One is that although Meta did not release any type of year in review, Meta India did release a year in review on Instagram, specifically about Indian phenomena, which again was cricket, something about a guy named Prashant and croissant. I don't know the context there.
If any listener is from India, please comment on Spotify so we can know what is this all about.
It was clearly something that I've seen a bit around, but yeah, don't have the context. And then Zoom also did one as a YouTube short, but it was a really bad joke. Like, they pretended like they were presenting survey data, but then it was like, what's the average number of tabs open per meeting? Too many. Stuff like that. Like, it was pretty lame.
Nevertheless, amusing and a good attempt to penetrate through the noise.
But yeah, so like I said, to open this, I think what we are seeing is, rather than these platforms, they're just choosing more of a silence avoidance strategy. There's no reason for them to do these things. They don't want to talk about politics on their platforms, clearly. So this is what we got. Pinterest predicts.
The one thing that I remember also reading in context of this was that YouTube announced, and I saw this as a news flash, that this year is the last year when they will produce this video, this composite video that you refer to, and that from next year onwards, there will only be this personalized video, like what is your year in YouTube, similar to Spotify, if you want.
They all have it, and that's the challenge with finding these is every time you search for year in review, it's for any platform. How do you generate your own year in review?
Yeah.
So it's really hard to sift through the Google search.
So maybe another trend that we could put here would be this hyper personalization.
Yeah.
There's no trend overall, either for a nation or for the world, but it's very in tuned with each individual user. And that obviously varies hugely by individual users. So we cannot see as scientists the trends, how different users combine to build something, which is a pity, I think. But it's a trend. Like if you had your keyword for silence, my keyword would be personalization, which leads to the same result, but for maybe different reasons. They don't need the marketing either. Remember, we were talking about this maybe some years back, that one reason for these reports to exist was to show how well they performed and how good they were at mobilizing interest and keeping up with trends and driving trends, like with TikTok. But they no longer need that. No. That's what I'm trying to say. Like, they're so established, they don't need any kind of publicity or reason to market themselves into this space.
I don't think the year in review is giving them too much to begin with.
Except for Pinterest, for example, right? I think Pinterest is being used for a lot of the, not necessarily individual users, but for companies that use web design, fashion, color, trends.
Just to end on that, the whole Pinterest Predicts website is accompanied by a click here to get consulting on how you can tap into these, right?
Yes, which is a business model.
Money at the end of the day.
Which could be the hashtag for the entire pod.
So your gift.
My gift. I've been debating, as usual, because of the strictness of time constraints, what to pick. And my keyword would be platform bans and regulation, which is a sidekick of it.
Classic.
And this is like my territory in this 10-year tradition that I should talk about this, but I want to broaden it to platform bans, and I will highlight some interesting trends, I think, at least interesting for me. And the first thing that I will highlight, because it's also a tradition at this point, is to talk about European politics, which is my other hat, and to talk about some new trends in the EU landscape. It's a law that has been voted last year, but that has become active. Its provision began applying in October of 2025, so very recent, not only in 25, but close to the recording of this podcast. And that legal act is the regulation on the transparency and targeting of political advertising, also known as TTPA for ease of communication. So the TTPA, this is part of a larger regulatory landscape, which is part of the Digital Services Act. Again, I'm not going to go too lawyer into this, but it's a very interesting and super relevant for us here topic, because this particular regulation, which means is the highest level of implementation of the EU, the one that is mandated that they should be implemented across the EU membership at the same time in the same way. Regulation. So what it aims to do is, as the name says, to make political ads more transparent. And what that translates to, it's that they need to be labeled as such. You cannot just guess. It has to be marked. They must indicate who sponsored the political ad, the sender. They must indicate the election, referendum, or legislative process that they relate to. What is this ad for? If they target someone or they personalize the delivery, they have to also name in the back end who they target. For example, is this an advertisement for young women living in cities? Just as an idea. And this transparency provision have to be publicly accessible and easily retrievable, including in a central European repository of political ads. So there's a lot of demands. And why they do this is because, as always with the EU, they have this evidence-based policymaking. A lot of research points out that there is need to strengthen democratic integrity and accountability. And because of the conflicts that are in proximity of the European Union, it aims to prevent hidden influence by requiring clear disclosure of sponsors and targeting. Because we have seen attempts in the past from Iran, from China, and probably in recent times even an increased presence of Russia as a hidden actor in the political playing field. And so that is one way to try to catch this particular influence.
I would save this, but I have to jump in now, which is, and ever the critic, I guess, but I am personally unconvinced that these ads persuade or change political opinion or result in mobilization or demobilization. I have not seen convincing evidence that social media ads change thoughts, or behaviors. Full stop. We had Dr. Alex Kopek on the show who found in the best case scenario where they pay people to watch the top produced ads by Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump campaigns, like paying them to sit at a computer, which is not what most people do when they're scrolling through social media. And they found a 0.05% increase in candidate favorability, null effect on voting, and of course those effects decay over 10 days. So I don't see it. So when the EU presents it as evidence-based, where is that evidence?
The evidence is that there is an attempt to manipulate elections.
I don't disagree with that, but I don't
will
think
give some examples. We've had last year in the pod, similar year in review 2024, we had the case of the Romanian elections, which were a case in point of how foreign influence was expressed through TikTok and how it did in that particular case sway elections in favor of a particular candidate, which was Russian friendly.
But if I recall, that was through nodes, that was through influencers.
Exactly, it's not necessarily ads. Exactly, the mechanisms. I think there were several mechanisms converging. So obviously, if you want to influence, you're not going to just put all your eggs in a single basket. Clever move, right? But there was a certain desire to prohibit manipulation of elections via this particular act. And I will talk about the effects of this act in just a second.
Just to add some healthy skepticism here. Don't drink the Kool-Aid.
No, again, there is some evidence about the presence of non-European actors attempting to influence European elections. And this is one of the transparency requirements that would make this less frequent. But of course, with the EU, there's also an underlying theme beyond the title of the law or the name of the law, which is the desire to create a harmonized regulatory landscape across the membership. Because prior to this particular legislation, every country within the EU, 27 member states, for the listeners who come outside the European Union, were 27 nations united under the same regulatory umbrella. Prior to this, everyone had their own rules. And this one makes this particular approach universal for the 27, which makes harmonization much easier, and it kind of locks in or connects to, as I said before, the Digital Services Act, but also the GDPR, which protects the privacy of data of individual citizens, how this data can be used to generate and particularly target political advertising, which is the other leg of this particular legislation, which I think is interesting for us researchers, because this particular law prohibits the use of so-called sensitive data in political advertising. So you cannot target based on political ideology, even if you were to openly disclose it. You cannot target on religious affiliation. You cannot target on gender labeling, even if it's voluntary from the person. Like if I were to label myself woman on Facebook, it's still not okay for an ad agency to use this information to target me. And that kind of shrinks the information pool for advertisement, in particular for targeting political advertising. And I think this is actually quite important. And we see a direct reaction because this particular regulation does not ban ads, is not banning speech. It says that it has to be very transparent. Who is behind the ad? How much it costs? Who is it targeted to? What is the content? Basically disclose everything. And what did Meta and what did Google do? You already know the answer. They
just said, I'm not messing with this.
Precisely. No ads. They simply said it's not advantageous for their model to continue to promote political ads. So that's a ban on political ads on Facebook and Instagram and on any Google
it shows on the one hand that these the talent and the resources of these tech companies they're simply better and faster than governments. They just are. So of course they're going to beat them at their own game. But I think what's also interesting is, of course, the EU is a large market, But remember that these countries have spending limits on how much they can spend, and of which their digital budget is going to be a fraction of that. So of course it's not worth it for these platforms.
These ads are about any ads, by the way. So the TTPA applies to any ad, even if you're printing a poster. But when you send a brochure or you are standing in the public square handing out little flyers, it has to be clearly marked. Who are you? And how did you, if you target, oftentimes when you're in a public square, you don't target. But if you were to target, how did you target? And you have to submit a copy of the brochure to a national repository saying like, the political party X or the interest group Y has done this particular brochure.
But if you're marketing lipstick, do you also have to...
No, political. Only political.
Okay, gotcha.
Only political ads. Yes. So basically it says any ad, physical
So
or...
not transparency on the ads that work.
And this would be a boon for us researchers, but the decision of digital platforms such as Meta and Google to withdraw from this landscape basically weakens our access to data even further, including the so-called ad library that Meta used to have. But I think it's interesting to think about what does that say about these platforms, right? Like, what is the power of platforms? And I think even though the text of the law doesn't explicitly say that ad literam, it's very clear that the law sees the social media platforms as political intermediaries that have power over what is being said, what is being marketed, what is being sent, and to whom. They can make or break how a specific message gets through, and this kind of gatekeepers of attention through their algorithms. And again, I'm not assigning intention in this kind of political way. I'm assigning intention as an afterthought. They are, if they want it or not, gatekeepers of attention. They are designers of political opportunity structures. And basically, they're, without this law, unaccountable campaign structures, because all this is very ad hoc. I'm not saying secretive necessarily on purpose, but it's so depending on the circumstances of a specific ad that you don't understand the mechanisms until the election is over. And we have seen several instances of that. And I think there is research, apropos evidence-based policymaking, that perfectly legal, truthful ads can still undermine democracy in the sense that you can have a very extreme voice in a political landscape, disclose this is who I am, I'm paying this much, and I'm targeting young men. But the message itself can still be anti-democratic in its nature. For example, promoting anti-Muslim or anti-Jewish sentiment. And we have seen this across the board, which is, again, just mentioning it out there.
Yeah, I mean, I think we saw this also with the couple of years back with Australia. Before the teen ban, there was the idea that the platforms have to pay royalties, pay the news companies, and then the government kind of stepped in and said, we're going to make you pay for redistributing this content. And then eventually, what happened? They balked. Facebook said, we're just going to pull out of Australia. And so they had to revise it. But of course, I think again, I'm just now in the counter-argument mode, is that the counter-argument for doing this, of course, is that it hurts small parties, because they're the one that actually benefits from these ads. And these small parties don't necessarily have to be anti-democratic. These are your green parties. These are your parties who actually benefit from breaking into the feeds of people. Not that they're changing their minds, but they're getting more visibility. This really only benefits the status quo with already large budgets to campaign.
It also has an incentive for this organic posting, right? Like you need to be going viral, quote unquote, in order to break the barrier.
Which is interesting you say organic, because it's also putting this in the context of that both Instagram and Meta have sort of downranked political content effectively, meaning you have to opt in, right? Or it's different. I was looking into this recently, but I forget what the exact policies are. But there's just a general pull away from it. The platforms aren't making enough money to make this worth what they're paying their teams.
Which is precisely what I want to comment on this. If there is some takeaway, why Meta and Google chose to ban political ads instead of conforming to the TTPA. in Europe specifically, of course. And their official statements, if you are to read what they said, they say that the TTPA is too complex, legal uncertainty is too high, and compliance costs outweigh benefits.
Precisely.
Because, of course, the political section of advertisement is much, much, much less than regular advertisement. So, of course, they don't want to risk it, basically. But I think there's a deeper reason behind this, why they say that we should withdraw from this space, because it becomes, I would say, structurally unattractive to these platforms. It's simply not worth the money if you want. It increases legal and reputational risk. If something gets advertised, which is very extreme, very negative, they don't want to be associated with that content, but they cannot monitor it. So ads become auditable, platforms become traceable, liability increases. Why bother? This is like a risk check. It also undermines the value of micro-targeting if you have to disclose all these things, which I find particularly interesting in terms of the value of social media in general. The value of social media is that you don't quite know why you see the content, ads or no ads, that you see. You don't know why you're being served, but sometimes you're like thinking, oh, thanks for this algorithm recommendation because it was just so spot on.
As in Pinterest, apparently.
As in Pinterest, as in Instagram. I think, the epitome is TikTok, right? But if you have to disclose all that, it seems a little bit, their precision is kind of watered down. If you cannot target on the basis of political identity or a gender identity or religious identity, like what are you going to target on? Just geography or age, which is acceptable within the acceptable limits. Maybe it's not giving you that specific precision advantage that used to be the secret sauce of Meta. And finally, what I think is interesting in this legislation or the legislation consequences is that it exposes platform power. And this is what Fabio Fota has been working quite a lot on, and I want to give him a shout out here in the pod because, among others, he is very clearly articulating how transparency makes algorithmic decisions visible. So if we had all these algorithms exposed, it would be clear how much power actually lies in these recommender systems and how indirectly and without any political guidance, we see the consequences of this targeting, and that this could risk for the platform perspective. If I would be like Zuckerberg looking in, I'll be like, this basically begs for further regulation because I can see how this circle of recommendations can drive Meta, but also YouTube, which is why Google basically opted out of this, into this kind of rabbit holes we've discussed in the pod context before. So they prefer to exit the market rather than operate under the democratic constraints. And obviously this leaves many other markets, including India, including, of course, the biggest the biggest cat in the world, the US, where the billion market in political advertisement exists. But I think it's finally what I'm saying, an interesting paradox, if you want to say it. Like, on one hand, this particular regulation strengthens democratic accountability, transparency, responsibility, but it also reduces, as you were saying before, the attractiveness of platform-based political advertising, which leads to platforms to pull out, which leads to reshaping political campaigning, especially for actors that don't have the pondus to generate organic posts on their own, penetrating through the, fourth wall. So I think it's pretty interesting what is happening, really. And I wouldn't be surprised if other platforms would follow suit and ban these ads in their turn.
Yeah. Two thoughts. One is, I think it's, we talked about this pendulum earlier, like going back to pen pals, right? I think if you haven't listened to the last episode with Solidarity Tech, I think that was a really interesting, stuck with me because it shows that, I know there's counterexamples, but especially in a European context, I think maybe in if you're targeting people, less educated, less literate, maybe it's different, but don't think political ads are that persuasive. But the power is in people, and the power is in organizing tech. and getting people to canvass and door knock and getting campaigns back on the ground. And so there may be a, as you said, changing of political campaigning. It may revert back to more sort of controlled, this idea of controlled interactivity, right? Like controlled and organized human canvassing, digitally mediated, but not in the form of political ads, which I am unconvinced have major effects. The other thing, and we were talking about this just before the podcast, is that a lot of institutions don't really know what's going on, right? There's a lot of information loss. And there was an episode earlier this year where we talked about these out-of-court dispute settlement bodies and that these platforms actually could not provide to these bodies the posts and the information about them that were in question, right? So I think that's where Meta goes, and YouTube, we can't even find these posts. And they want us to do all this extra work. This takes allocation of resources. Now, to get to this idea, I think this applies to both Meta as a platform. Think about how much data is going through there. They can't be on top of everything with organization. The EU as a technocratic, supranational, governance structure. Yeah, they can present regulation, but there's a lot of information loss between all of these various processes that they have. So, in a sense, I think it is an information coordination problem where a lot of institutions just, it's like the Spider-Man meme. Everyone's pointing at everyone else, but no one really knows what's going on. I do think
that the platforms, through these algorithmic recommendations that are very opaque, do really make or break things. And this is, quote unquote, gaming the algorithm has been a recipe for a lot of election campaigns. We talked about, again, the Romanian election last time. I have the example of the Albanian elections this year. Maybe not so important in the big scheme of things. Albania is a small country, even outside the European Union, but it has been dominated by a lot of foreign actors trying to pull Albania in and out of different constellations, whether it should be, so to say, friends with the European Union or rather align itself with European Union's enemies in the East. There's been a lot of these smaller examples where, because of the lack of money, there's a lot of reliance on the algorithm itself rather than the campaign planning, all the deets, combining off and online activities, door knocking and so on. And I think when the platforms indirectly get this kind of responsibility, which they don't want, let me be very clear, I agree with you entirely that they do not wish upon themselves this kind of political complications, but that necessarily they get because people as citizens are active on their platforms. I think this results in very clear pathways to power that pass through these algorithms. Which again would lead me to my second gift, which I will save for when that time will come. I think nevertheless this is important. I think this regulation is just a signal of the power of platforms in this political space. And if I have the time, and I probably don't have the time, but I'm just going to mention it very quickly. What I think is very interesting is on one hand, we have the European Union banning political ads or having that. We have, as you were saying, last year, Australia banning social media for under 16s. And I think this month, this law also gains power as a law. We have Denmark and Norway also banning social media accounts for under 13, actually. So going even at the younger ages. So we have a lot of attempts in what we call the Western world to contain social media presence. And in a very reverse image, we have several protests around the global south, if you want to call it. Again, it's very difficult to group together these countries, but in countries where the states are not very strong, where economy is not going very well, we have a massive round of Gen Z protests that are generated or motivated by platform banning. And I just want to sing this. I'm not going to go into details. I could, but again, in the benefit of time, I'm just going to name this, that in the Western world, we see a lot of attempts to control social media. In Australia, within the EU, even in the US, there's attempts to regulate social media use for children. At the same time that in other parts of the world, like in Nepal, like in Nigeria, like in Pakistan, like in Turkey, where governments try to ban social media, in particular TikTok, but not only Instagram, Discord, which is another platform we haven't talked so much about, completely.
Didn't have a year in review report.
Yeah, damn it. Discord, be better. So the governments are trying to prohibit access to these platforms, and that is the engine of a lot of protests. And obviously the case in point is Nepal, which was a protest kind of spanning 2024 and 2025. So it's not purely 25, but that was a signal of how important these platforms are for young people in the, again, global south, if we want to call it this way, even though technically it's not purely south, because we have a combination of political and economic incentives. And in a sense, to summarize it, I think for a lot of the people in this part of the world, which is not Europe and not the US and not Australia, access to social media platforms is both a livelihood and a certain form of digital rights. They feel that they can be connected with other people in the country, with a lot of the diaspora, which finances through remittance systems the economy of that country, but also helps them make the ends meet by advertising, by having small shops, by being a local influencer, and being prohibited by the government to access TikTok, to access Discord, to access Instagram, generated huge amounts of protests that were very much inspired from one another under this pirate flag, that were signaling the importance of social media, very different from the, let's say, Arab Spring back in 2011, where social media were just the tools to promote coordination, or what it was called connective action. Remember, Bennett and Segeber? Now the platform ban was a way to infringe upon what the young people perceived as citizens' rights to digital presences, both in terms of their political and their economic activity. So I think it's an interesting divide in this world between people who want to restrain social media and people who want to actually expand or guarantee the right to social media.
Yeah, I just think that, I know it's well-intentioned, and again, I'm kind of playing devil's advocate here, but I think the amount of time, effort is not worth it because A, the science isn't there, I would argue. B, that there is a risk that when you over-regulate, you have exactly these backlash effects. And I would be very curious to see that kind of risk-benefit analysis. I don't think it's not worth from the platform side, but also for the government side and indirectly for the taxpayer to have these types of regulations.
That's it.
But it ties very well into my third gift. So let me hop into this. It's not going to be a long one because I don't have so much to say other than the title of it is Meta.
Meta what?
And not the platform, but just meta level, meta thinking, metaphysics. Which I've just been doing a little bit of reflection on the last, it's kind of interesting with this podcast. It's a mix of people that I really seek out and want to talk to, and then it's just a mix of kind of life happens and meet people doing interesting stuff, and then there's kind of people who reach out. And so I was just kind of thinking what has been going on? What has been covered on this podcast in the past couple months? And I think that when looking at it, there's kind of a story that emerges, and it's essentially, it doesn't sound very interesting, but that the digital political system is evolving faster than we can study it or regulate it. I mean, that's kind of always been the case. But before, it was just the platforms themselves, right? These platforms are just adding all these new features. But I think we're seeing a compounding of complexity, and I think it's something that these past couple podcasts have pointed to. And so I was thinking each episode more or less is kind of hitting on a different layer of this complexity. And so first, very much following up on your gift, is this macro layer of governance. So we spent some episodes this year talking about the democracy shield and EU policy. And with all these teen bans, I think that the era of voluntary platform self-regulation is over. So that's the macro layer of governance. Then there's kind of this meso layer or middle layer of the models, the predictions, the analytical tools. So we had an episode looking at prediction markets and how these are kind of rivaling.
Yeah, I love that episode.
Rivaling
One of my favorites.
Media. We also looked at AI-enabled qualitative methods that can iterate at scale. And so the models and tools of studying political communication are changing. Then we have the educational layer. How do we prepare the next generation so that they are up to date to handle these tools? So I talked a little bit about some teaching initiatives I've been working on this year. And I think we risk training students for a world that no longer exists, right? Like if we teach political communication theory from the 2010s, graduates won't be prepared for the 2020s and beyond. So then we shift into the bigger, this is what I think is super interesting, the knowledge or the epistemic layer by talking about meta-science and Dr. Kevin Munger's idea of temporal validity, that like at the big level of what we're doing, we're studying a moving target with methodological approaches that are built for a static world. Like the findings of 2025 don't apply to 2026 in some cases if ads are banned, for example.
Exactly. For these platform changes that are the result of optimization, technologically speaking, or regulation, as predicted by laws.
And so then there was this last episode with Solidarity Tech, which was not a political technology at all from the beginning, at least in terms of electoral campaigning, but it highlighted how tech is useless without people. Like it can coordinate.
A very obvious thing, right? But still needs to be said.
So this is the critical micro layer. Like we have unstable platforms, shifting policies, new prediction models, decaying research validity, outdated education, but it is in human agency and its organization that is what remains the durable source of political power. So there's all these layers that are going into how we try to understand this very complex phenomenon. I don't think you can pin it just on one or the other to really get a sense of how do we understand this, even as it continues to evolve. And so that's also had me reflect a bit on the general way we've been approaching platforms is what they make possible or the powers that they have. And that is different from thinking about the conditions through which that possibility turns into something real. Mm-hmm. So as you were saying about the governance bans, it depends on the conditions. Like you can have the same ban in two countries, but when the conditions are different, you have different outcome effects. Protest in one, compliance in another. So it's the conditions you can study to explain effects, but thinking about what's possible, so what? There's bans that are possible in both cases, but when they're actually implemented, it's the conditions that explain differences in protests versus compliance.
Yeah, definitely the conditions go beyond the platforms themselves. It's about a complex situation in which demography, economy, even geography, geopolitics kind of pull together to explain why some things happen in place one but not in place two.
And so the question is whether we're researchers or regulators or consultants or whatever it is, do we want to explain what's possible or do we want to explain what happens and how to make it happen?
It's a good rhetorical question.
And it makes you think of what Dr. Munger was saying, where she was saying we're too tied to old theory. And in his view, which is something I'm kind of partial to, is that we should kind of blow up a lot of the older media theories and start over with digital first. So that brings me to the old concept of affordances.
Oh, your favorite concept to discuss and debate.
To today. So affordances are all about possibility. And we keep asking what platforms make possible. And I think the way to integrate all these various layers is to focus on the conditions through which those possibilities get taken up by politicians, by citizens, by media, by whoever. It's not useful to theorize about possibility because the interesting part is that possibility cannot explain action. It is insufficient.
But it may be necessary. Necessary but not sufficient.
Necessary but not sufficient. because you always need to incorporate other conditions. So, for example, if a staircase offers me climbability, climbability doesn't understand why I go upstairs. You need other conditions.
Exactly.
You need to have motivation, ability, access to the staircase.
And this is what is being regulated, right? You cannot regulate the conditions under which a person would go upstairs, which is a very mundane equivalent, right? But you can regulate how a staircase should look like so that everyone should have access to it and they would know there is a staircase there.
But that doesn't solve everyone being able to climb the stairs.
They should, for example, by being required to have a function variation accommodation, right? So depends on the level, right? But you can say how a building should be accessible for everybody as a platform should be accessible for everybody.
Yeah. I've been thinking a lot about, and this is a preface to the research I've been doing, is really trying to grapple with this difference between possibility and actuality, and making an argument that it's really about the conditions that policymakers, researchers, campaigners should be interested in. And it's a question of where does power reside? Is there such thing actually as platform power? Or can platform power be explained through conditions? It's a heavy argument, but I'm working on it and I'm not going to go through it here. But I think it is a helpful framework to reorient away from possibilities and powers and to conditions and explanation. And the kind of theoretical work I'm doing is actually arguing why giving platforms power does not hold. It's just illogical, because you actually can't root possibility in an object. This is what metaphysicians debate.
There's the meta.
And so just to kind of put this so it's not so abstract, like in research we would say that Facebook through friending made connectivity possible. Agree or disagree?
Connectivity existed prior to Facebook, right?
Exactly. So it's not Facebook that created the power of connecting. You could connect before through SMS or...
It was a facilitator.
A facilitator. And so it matters where we actually place possibility, which I know sounds very abstract, but the problem, I think, from research is that we smuggle in the conditions into the possibility. So we're not actually talking about, like, if you theorize about what's possible and you study actual behavior, you're not studying possibility at all.
You study manifest possibility.
Study manifest through conditions. And so I've sort of broken these down into 4 parts, which is first access, right? You have to have access to a technology for any sort of behavior to manifest. You need ability to use the technology. There's also what is the design of the platform itself, and then the sort of social political context. And I think you can explain a lot of what's going on these various levels of the digital political communication ecosystem through these 4 broad genres. The specific conditions will differ. But I just think focusing on conditions helps kind of reorient how we think about platforms. It explains why research findings don't travel well over time because conditions change. It explains why policy interventions don't always have the effects we expect.
Yeah, as per the TTPA.
Right? And it explains why practitioners often say, like, oh, these theories, how you're thinking about things, aren't actually how it works on the ground. Because you don't understand the conditions. It's not because you're not theorizing, incorrect about the platform. So if we want to understand digital politics, I think, here's the argument, we need to stop asking only what platforms make possible and start asking what are the conditions through which political action actually happens. It's a very meta argument, but stay tuned. It will be coming out hopefully in the next year. But I think it's helped me make sense more, for example, of not thinking about the powers that platforms have. Because getting into the weeds, we cannot grant platforms the power to create new possibilities.
Well, again, this is where I agree with your overall argument about the conditions. I think context really matters, and taking the stair, virtually speaking, or not taking the stair is an option. that is dictated by your need to do that or the other. At the same time, I think that there is an incentive, not an obligation, but an incentive which is generated by actors in this digital space, be it the platforms themselves or actors that entice you into the digital sphere, such as political parties or movements or advertisers of various sorts, that can generate almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you're on this platform, then you can do all these things and kind of give you the illusion, at least, of enabling you to modify the world or at least your own life or livelihood.
But just to tie this back to your second gift, the argument would be is that regulating the possibility of parties to advertise, which I know is more about transparency, but let's just say that was the case. It's not about regulating the possibility, it's about regulating the conditions under which political ads are persuasive and anti-democratic.
Precisely. It's regulating the condition, not banning the thing, right? Exactly. And it's very important that this is spelled out, that you could definitely do any advertising as long as it is A, B, and C, and D, primarily transparent along several conditions.
Exactly. And so I think that's just an example from that macro governance layer of that's how you reorient the thinking. And I think it spills down into each one and it helps put a frame, but
I think
still
generally,
working on it.
I think regulators are more in the camp you appear to be on, the conditions. Like they don't necessarily think about the intrinsic properties that are available to digital platforms writ large, but they're very concrete, very interested in the concrete manifestations of those possibilities. Like yes, you can pay for ads. That's a manifest opportunity, but you cannot just do it in any other way, but in this way that we regulate, right? So it's regulating the conditions under which certain events happen, platforms operate, and so on.
Exactly. And so just to end, it's the argument is not that there's no such thing as affordances, but that they're actually not possibilities, they're action contingencies. And for the nerds out there, I've been digging into Gibson. He never used possibility in his writing. That's something that kind of grafted on afterwards. So I think there's something to contingency and just thinking about, is it worthwhile thinking about what is possible, what is necessary, what is contingent, what is actual? I think it is actually, because when we talk about platforms, we tend to treat them as like these magical sources of good or bad things, and I think it's actually more explainable by conditions. So that's the gift.
I agree with this, and I don't think platforms are in this magical properties, but I do think in a sense they are a magical space. Because my last or my second or fourth gift altogether is this idea, which I hope will stimulate the thinking of listeners who made it this far. Bravo.
Yeah, I'm sure we can see the drop off in the Spotify stats.
So I'm just going to say it. What I think is interesting and connects very well to what you were saying before is this idea of a synthetic public sphere with the rise of AI agency. And I'm thinking about AI agency in two separate ways. One is the obvious bot agency, and we've dealt with bots in various forms since 2016 at least. Of course, the technological development has made them more and more independent, or maybe I should say autonomous, but very close to acting in their own way without a human involvement at every step of the way. So you can delegate a lot of this conversation, digital conversation, to an AI agent that can make own decisions based on training data and the context in which it is placed. And we see that happening very often. So we see this kind of public sphere, digital public sphere, invaded by these AI agents that sometimes are declared, but I believe in most cases are not.
So you mean like if campaign uses an AI to generate part of its message or a speech, for example, then that would be the bot entering the public sphere? Or
even a lower entry point, which is probably the most common way to use AI. But I'm thinking about an account that is being an AI account, even though it's not necessarily declared as such. For example, being a supporter of a particular party or a particular idea, bringing in news citations that exist in the real world from established sources like Financial Times or The Economist, but basically recruiting these sources through an AI search modality and being able to express in words across different languages through the AI modality. So the AI speechwriter is the lever below because you'd still have a human attribution. In this case, it would be a pure AI agent that would have a task to represent a certain political ideology or to inoffensively simply be a data curator about a specific topic. For example, the war in Ukraine. And oftentimes, platforms are not required to disclose whether one or another account is AI enabled or not. Most of the time, it's a voluntary option. And I'm not sure that X has it, but for sure, Facebook and Instagram have it, a certain check that you can manually mark. Most people don't do that, but that doesn't necessarily tell you how much AI is used in filtering images or in curating data. So that's one idea. Like,
I'm still, just to clarify, that you're thinking of like truly autonomous social media accounts that just pipe stuff from ChatGPT and post.
One option would be exactly that it has a purpose. For example, a news aggregator about a specific topic. Again, something that is in the news. It could be the Epstein files. It could be a war. So it could be
could be if you could create your own follower network of people who would all like and positively comment on things that you post. I would appreciate that.
Yeah, I think this already exists and you can pay for it too, which is why basically this synthetic public sphere can degenerate, right? When the entire digital arena is being populated in part, such as in speech generated by AI, but made by a human, or purely automated, such as in this inoffensive scenario of a news curator or interpreter that is not declared but focuses on specific conflict areas or topics of interest, right? This synthetic public arena almost excludes humans because AI agents are made to optimize visibility by the use of hashtags, by the use of time of the day, by the use of mentions, by the use of all the classic algorithms that we've been talking on this podcast for 10 years now, right? But they are trained on this and they are much more astute in deploying these particular tools to maximize visibility in order to obtain influence via attention. But at the same time, this kind of optimization for the synthetic agents can exclude a lot of human agents that are less astute. They are less versed. They may post at the wrong point in time and maybe too long posts and without any image, just at the very basic level, which basically would make a lot of citizens who would like to populate this public sphere and engage in some form of dialogue, if not deliberation, they would be excluded by the algorithm, which is the second part of the synthetic element. So you have synthetic agents, this kind of AI-powered accounts, and probably even more powerful, this AI recommender system that regulates visibility without transparency, which is what the EU legislation is attempting to do more or less successfully. So,
if they couldn't, they would have to trick the platforms that they were human, because otherwise the platforms would uprank authentic content. I think because we've seen that with Facebook and the more meaningful connections.
But this is no longer, again, from my understanding, this is no longer a word of the day, because it's beginning to be very difficult to separate what is human and what is AI, as a lot of humans deliberately use AI to customize messages, right? So you cannot ban an account for potential AI use because it is an actual human, but they've been powered by Gemini, by Claude, by GPT.
It reminds me of just a fun kind of flashback as when thinking about the decade that has, is the term cyborg.
Yeah.
Remember that? We talked about
God.
like bots being cyborgs because they're now we really have more of like cyborgs.
Now is a thing, right? Now we see it. But it's interesting to think about in a political sense. I mean, you could think this is just a technological development. Humans may welcome this. Those who are adept at gaming the algorithm, humans or corporations or institutions or NGOs, whatever, they can use this to their advantage. But I think if we go back to this idea of democracy, like it relies ultimately on citizens being informed and engaged in the political sphere. To bother to vote, you need to have a feeling that it matters. And you need to know what is at stake. What are we voting on? Is it about this, that, or the other? And because a lot of humans are being down-voted, if you want, or downplayed in these algorithms because they don't behave optimally, because they're humans, whereas AI agents are very much optimized, then a lot of citizens may reproduce this kind of disenchantment with politics and withdraw from any kind of public sphere in a political sense even more, because they perceive that they're outplayed, if you want, by super clever, optimized agents, be them fully automated or partially automated. And that, if we are considering this kind of pessimistic spiral, would basically lead to this public sphere being completely useless from a democratic point of view and being occupied only by those political actors that either have the money or the resources, the know-how to be present in an algorithmic public sphere, or by very, very technologically astute citizens, but not representing necessarily the citizenry in any given electoral base, which makes this idea of political ads even more redundant. Why would you do political ads to target them at whom? At bots? This is a wasted money. So the question is, what would be the consequences of this synthetic public sphere where artificial intelligence technology is both the structure, which means the algorithms that uprank or downrank some content, and the agency, the actual accounts, the actual content makers that you get to encounter if you were there as a human online, right? So then there's no value in this digital sphere at all if everything is being delegated to an automation. You see what I mean?
I see what you mean. What I'm thinking with social media, like a feed and comments and stuff, maybe even Reddit conversations, like more text-based, I don't see that universe happening. Where I think it becomes much more plausible is video and short form video. Like, I think there is actually an argument that, because I've seen some of these AI videos or starting to splice, we'll have an AI like sort of mythical, wizard, and then someone who's actually real, and they'll kind of cut between the two. And I think in that case, it does make more sense that there could be a real fight for attention where scripted AI content in a short form video platform like TikTok could actually compete with the stuff that humans could produce, because there's
I think we already see that. It's not even a question of if it is there. The question is like, if we should do something about this, or if we just let market technologies take over. And this is, I think, this is where the knitting cafe kind of thing comes in, because the word of the year for the Webster Dictionary is slop. And slop really refers to this low quality AI generated content that floods online spaces, and that includes also political discourse, but is not restrained to that. It can be in any arena of interest. And that because it's kind of superficial, fast made, pieced together without any deep knowledge of anything, it's in a sense worthless. There's no value. There's no entertainment value. There's no knowledge value. There's no political value in that slop, which is why the name, I love it actually. It's a pretty good reuse of this name for a digital context. So what do we do about this slop? If the entire public sphere is slop, if new models, LLM models, large language models are being trained on slop, because I believe the number was about 70% of every new content since 2023-4 is AI generated, or in part or fully. If we train AI on slop, if the AI generates more slop, then it becomes simply unpalatable. There's only that much slop.
Slop slide.
Yeah, it's just not interesting anymore. We have now fully digitalized channels which are powered by these visual algorithms that probably you were referring to, the Nano Banana from Gemini and Sora from OpenAI, that are labeled and probably identifiable in some technical way by different structures of the way their pixels are configured, and are consumed by some and are spread by some, but are not really what people want on this marketplace of social media, right?
Yeah, it will simply test human tolerance for that. I just heard earlier today a podcast about the wool industry in Britain. Wool from sheep for clothes, right? Which has been downsliding because of industrialization from cotton, was the first, and then like Chinese fast fashion, all that stuff. But now we're starting to see demand for high quality natural wool increase because people are fed up with, Shein, all this fast fashion stuff would be an example of slop. The market eventually.
And this is exactly the thing. If you're an optimist, this is exactly the argument you'd make, that in a world where everything is synthetic, human is the premium value, right? So you can consume synthetic content if you have no alternative, but human interactions or human-made anything, content or clothes or anything else, is the premium value. Or you can think that a new generation of consumers will be shaped through this kind of media effects of exposure to a digitally curated, at least, public arena, where it would be almost impossible for them to detect the human versus AI, or even worse, the fact that humans may be slower, more confusing, more bumbling around would be a downgrade.
It's like Blade Runner.
It is.
But
We're
also,
entering this territory now with cyborgs.
I think it reminds me of this point of casual cool from the Snapchat recap, which is that this idea that if you send kind of boring pictures, it's a symbol of closeness. Well, it's because the picture itself, like if you take a picture of you walking down the street, take a picture of the sidewalk, it's not interesting, but it's the person sent you that picture that is a signal of closer and friendship. So it needs that human context to make things that objectively are meaningful.
And this is the question, right? Like, what will be in demand? Maybe we're old school. Maybe we're representing the old generation that values this imperfect but decisively and explicitly human, imperfect communication. Whereas people that are now maybe turning 18, entering the political space, they're looking for this very polished, very specific, AI filtered at least, reality. And this is where politics enters into the space. We know, for example, that during the Canadian elections of 2025, there were very many AI agents deployed. We have clear data on this. We already anticipate several other circumstances where this has been the case. I'm trying to find all my notes. Of course, in the U.S. context, there's been a lot of AI-generated explicit and implicit context, including Trump himself generating several AI videos of himself in very. I'm not going to give too many examples because I don't want to amp that. But Trump himself used AI slop, if you want to illustrate the point. And then we have also seen that, as I said before, in both the German federal elections and the Albanian parliamentarian elections of 2025. All this recent elections and recent examples of this synthetic public sphere. And I think this is very problematic for an informed citizen discussion and participation, which is something that for me is the underlying support for any democratic basis. If citizens at all go vote, which has been in decline for a while, then the way that we necessarily inform them and prime them for the things that are at stake, which are very important. There are wars, there's economy, there's space exploration, there's all sorts of threats, including climate and so on. I'm not sure that citizens that are active in this synthetic public sphere are able to navigate without being persuaded or pushed in certain directions by actors that are very mindful of these opportunities and conditions, to use your word, and maximize them to their own interest and advantage.
Yeah, I think there's two things. I'll take a third off-ramp to your reflections and arguments here. That one is that I think about the political communication cycle, Ben and Epstein's work, that we are at the end of, like, once things start getting really heavily regulated, that usually signals we're on the cusp of another communication revolution. I'm not sure it's AI. I think it'd actually be a different form of hardware. Like, what are we at? iPhone 17? Like, we gotta make a shift at some point. But what we also know from that is that the old technology doesn't go away. So I think that what you're saying, this AI-moderated AI agents will exist in some form. They'll go across different technologies, but I think there will be something else that won't, it won't be the only option, these social media platforms. Like, something will come in the next 10 years, probably before this technology reaches that. I don't know about that, but it's a reflection. And the other is that, going back to Blade Runner, one of my favorite anecdotes ever, I think it was in the book Digital Politics by Jamie something. Anyways, he argues that, Blade Runner was made in the 80s, and they could predict all this human replica stuff.
Yes.
But in the movie, when they go to use a phone, it's always attached to a cord,
phone, yes.
right? Like, so we're very good at, as humans, projecting the big implications, but like missing small things that, like, yeah, if we're in this world that has, robots that look like humans, we probably don't have phones that are attached to cords. So there's something in between, whether it's a different hardware or something else, that I think the concerns you raise are valid, but I think something will come in and mediate that from going in this fully dystopian direction. It's not going to be regulation. It's going to be either market dynamics or some other condition.
I think this kind of human premium, we already see it in many directions, and the examples we brought from various fields can cement that. But it also can be a question of access, that maybe it's going to be, again, another so-called divide, world divide. And yeah, we will see the AI adoption and the AI invasion that is being also very, very much pushed, not only naturally because people are curious and want to explore it, but also because companies advertise and want to grab markets in this field, including India, in terms of geographic expansion. I think there is particular interest in India.
So now that you're big future thinking, what will you be watching in 2026?
I will definitely watch several elections that are coming up, and because I'm interested in this kind of synthetic versus human dilemma in the public sphere, I will see how much of AI elements will be present, but also how much politicians will problematize or be open about AI, whether, so say, citizens will disclose, oh my God, this politician used AI in order to promote a certain video or the text. And we have seen this, backfire. There's something that Jung, for example, calls the AI penalty. Whenever citizens realize that there's an AI agent involved, either in a campaign messaging, but in particular in kind of deliberative spaces where an AI bot is a partner of conversation, people disengage. So there's a vote down, thumbs down to any kind of AI intrusion in what is perceived as a purely human space, for example, politics. So we can see that, but I'll be looking for this kind of relationship between humans and AI in the political arena, whether politicians will feel emboldened for using AI to communicate more humorously or to reach certain audiences through AI language translation and interpretation, or whether this will actually backfire if they use it. And from my understanding, from talking to, again, a more particular class, which is Swedish politicians and political campaigners, there's not a huge appetite for using AI fully on. Actually, the current Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson has been recently ridiculed, I guess is the word, for using AI in his Christmas greetings. So that's not considered okay.
Is this the point where we reveal to the listeners that this has been an AI-generated podcast? Or?
Yeah, it sounds like us, but there's a lot of training data, 10 years worth of it.
Jeez.
Which is another thing, like some people are more vulnerable to this training or remodeling. People that have been in the public space, where there is a lot of trace data about them, their mannerisms, their appearance, their voice, their habits. They're much more easy to model than people that have no digital trace whatsoever, which makes a vulnerability for example, former politicians or public figures in any arena, even influencers, that may also feel the need to distance themselves from such AI impersonations. And I think there's a growing concern a lot of influencers now have outside the political sphere, but also within it, that accounts are duplicating them and making money off them under a different account name and from a totally different IP address.
As I look at the ticker, we are at 1 hour, 58 minutes.
No, not again.
So let's close it down before we hit the 2 hour mark.
Yes, let's do
Shall
it.
we? And thank you to the listeners who have stuck around this far. Stay tuned. There will be more pods, in the new year. Hit the ground running.
Thank you so much for having me yet again for the
10th annual.
And I'm very curious if anybody cares to leave a comment on Spotify.
Please leave a comment on Spotify. Let's really crank it next year with 3 or 4. Let's do it.
All right. Thank you so much, Michael, for having me this year. It was very exciting.
Thank you for joining, and thank you to the listeners. And we will see you in 2026. Merry Christmas. Happy holidays.